أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. In the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful, all the praises and thanks be to God, the Lord of the worlds, the most beneficent, the most merciful, owner of the day of judgment. It is you who we worship and you who we ask for help. Guide us to the straight path, the way of those whom you have bestowed your grace, not the path of those who earned your anger, nor of those who went astray.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Ali, for the Quranic recitation. And thank you all again for joining us tonight. Today, inshallah, we will be discussing service in Islam. It is said in the Quran that serve God and join not any partners with him, and do good to parents, kinsfolk, orphans, those in need, neighbors who are near, neighbors who are strangers, the companion by your side, the wafer you meet, and what your right hands possess. Serving the underserved, taking care of our neighbors, and giving back to those in need are basic principles of Islamic service and really all of humanity. To talk more about this important topic, we are blessed today to have Brother Edmund joining us tonight. Edmund Arroyo is a licensed clinical social worker and licensed school social worker. He is the founder of the HeartSpeak Institute, which is an organization that provides counseling and education to individuals, couples, and families. He employs cognitive behavioral therapy within the framework of systems theory when working with his clients. Using this perspective, psychological symptoms are viewed as manifestations of a dysfunctional family, marriage, or group dynamic. The focus of the treatment then becomes the systems that individual belongs to, not the symptomatic individual. As a result of his extensive experience counseling families and couples in the Muslim community, Mr. Arroyo has been asked to present on marriage and family issues at numerous conferences. He has presented on matters of faith and marriage at the annual ISNA conference in Chicago. Mr. Arroyo also co-taught the dynamics of marriage in Muslim America for the Nawawi Foundation with Dr. Omar Farouk Abdullah. He participated in teaching in Zaytuna Minara Conference on marriage in Chicago as well. Mr. Arroyo currently works full-time in public high school, providing individual counseling, transitional student assistance, and heading up leadership and drug prevention programming. He also provides training and consultation on a wide range of topics, including but not limited to classroom management, effective containment of bullying, creating a positive school culture, and peer mediation. Without further ado, please help me in welcoming Brother Edmund Arroyo.
Assalamu alaikum. It's always interesting to see what bio was going to be read. I felt like, that was for a conference maybe that I presented at for maybe for families. But regardless, it's I think I'll just go back to the one thing that you said in there about my perspective in counseling, and that is that we are all individuals as part of systems or communities, whether that's your immediate family or your friend group or your religious community. And so that kind of relates back to what we're talking about here today. And the ayah that Sister read or translated for us, I'm going to read another one that's very similar, just to underscore this concept within our faith about service. And it's in Surah Al-Baqarah, and it's 177. It is not righteousness that you turn your faces towards the east or west, but it is righteousness to believe in God and the last day, and the angels, and the book, and the messengers. So first it starts off with the articles of faith, and then it goes to the very next thing, to spend of your substance out of love for him, for your kin, for orphans, for the needy, for the wayfarer, for those who ask, and for the ransom of slaves, to be steadfast in prayer. And then it moves on to the pillars of our faith, which is to be steadfast in prayer, to give regular charity. Now, I think it's pretty significant that distinguishes giving in regular charity from also giving to the poor in other times. And then also to fulfill the contracts which you have made, to be firm and patient in adversity, and it goes on. But really, I just want to emphasize there what I think is really significant, and that is that in this moment it's talking about righteousness, the implication morality as a human being, and that comes from not the little details of how you're praying and those kind of things. Those are all important for us as Muslims, but also it's really concentrating on the fact that when it comes to righteousness as a person, these other things and serving humanity is a big part of it. So I just got back from Puerto Rico, alhamdulillah. It was pretty warm there. I needed it. We all could use the warmth. I'm looking at these waves out here, and I'm seeing similar waves to what I was saying, but much warmer, I'm sure. And I want to start off with a story about my first trip to Puerto Rico, which was about 4 years ago. I went there, and I was with my in-laws and my wife, and one of the first things that we wanted to do is try to find zabiha meat, right? Because we were going to stay there for 2 weeks. And one of the challenges as a Muslim about traveling in Puerto Rico is that there's a lot of pork, and they cook a lot of things in pork. And so if anything's fried, there's a good chance it was fried either in lard or in something that pork was fried in. A lot of pork was fried in. So it's a challenge. So we knew that going into it. So we said, okay, well, we're going to do a lot of cooking on our own, so we rented a place. And so I found there was a mosque near where I was staying. So I went down, it's this little mosque, it was like half the size of this room, and nobody's there. Put a note in the mailbox, and then saying we're in the area, we're traveling, and we're looking for some what we consider like kosher meat in Islam. And about an hour and a half later, we're still unpacking and everything. I get a call, and it's an Arab guy, and he's telling me in broken English, we couldn't understand each other, so he says, meet me at the mosque. So we meet him at the mosque, and we pray, and then he says, okay, I think I can get you some meat, and we're just still struggling to understand each other. And then all of a sudden I said, wait a second, do you speak Spanish? He said, yeah. And so we started talking in Spanish, because I'm Mexican, right? So here I am, like, a Mexican Muslim convert speaking to an Arab guy in Spanish in Puerto Rico, trying to figure out how to find meat. And then an hour later, we're driving across Puerto Rico, an hour and a half, to some friend of his, and we're picking up some lamb from this guy, right? And I'm like, only when you're a Muslim this stuff happens, right? So, and then I remember sitting there thinking, this is kind of crazy. I don't even know this guy. I met him like an hour and a half ago, and now we're driving in the dark somewhere in Puerto Rico. And we pull up, and he goes, this guy's a little bit crazy, so you just stay in the car. I was like, okay, whatever that means. So the guy comes out, his hair's all messed, and he's like undershirts on, and then he's talking to this guy in Arabic, and then he brings out this garbage bag. So basically the story is he just got through slaughtering this lamb like the day before, and he had it in the freezer. So he gave us almost like a half lamb, and then I got my wallet out. I said, how much is he charging us, in Spanish? And then he says, oh, don't worry about it. Just go in the car. So we go in the car, and I said, okay, how much did it? He goes, I paid him already. How much did it cost? And he said, nothing. It's for you. I bought it for you. And I said, wait a second. This wasn't part of the deal. I said, I asked you for your help, and you driving me here is enough. And he said, no, because you're a traveler, I get the reward for feeding you. So this is one of the things that we have within our faith, is that, all those categories that were mentioned already in the two different verses that were translated for you are different categories and ways that we are held responsible for helping humanity. And so just by the fact that he saw me as a traveler, he saw it as an opportunity to serve God by providing this meat for me. And so he said, if you really want to give something, just give to the mosque, whatever you thought you were going to pay me. So we did that, and it leaves you with a great feeling. And then him and his family, actually, when we end up cooking, end up coming out for dinner a couple nights later, and we got to talk about how they came to Puerto Rico and everything else. And I won't tell you the rest of that story, but I think it's a good opening to the fact that when, as a Muslim, I said, and I actually wrote an article for NPR that year, and they put it on their website, and it said how when becoming a Muslim opened the world to me, because I could go to China and Indonesia and anywhere else, and simply because I'm Muslim, people will invite me into their house because they know we already have some things in common. So, it's just kind of like meeting somebody when you're in America, you meet somebody and someone else from America, like, hey, oh yeah, we're from Chicago too, and it's like really exciting. Well, it's the same kind of thing. And a lot of people don't realize that, between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 people in the world is Muslim, so it really does open the world to you. And simply by our brotherhood then, we feel an obligation to serve each other, especially if somebody's visiting you. So when it comes to being a good neighbor, it's the basis of good character in a lot of faiths, and especially in the Judeo-Christian faith and Judeo-Christian Muslim faith. If we just look at the 10 Commandments, we know that the last 2 of the 10 Commandments have to do with the neighbor. Do not, thou shalt not covet. What are they? Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife or your house or anything that belongs to your neighbor. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And it really makes you think about, of the 10 Commandments, 2 of them have to do with your relationship with your neighbor, and there's got to be some very strong significance to that. And one of the things that Christian and Jewish scholars would say is that this is more like a moral imperative when it comes to these rules. They're more moral imperatives, and to imply how you should live your life as a moral person. And so when we look at that, I think it's really fascinating, especially when I was in college. We talked about, I had a class called Utopian Communes, I think it was called. And it was about how a lot of different Christian groups tried to establish communes across this country, and towns where really that concept, commune or community, is developed upon this basic idea that I'm going to depend on you as my neighbor, and we're going to have this interdependence going on within our community, and we're going to make a happy place here. And so there's this concept even now within the United States, and this is one of the biggest, I believe, one of the best assets or character aspects of American culture, and that is being good to your neighbor. And this concept of the block parties. I grew up in the South Side, and these block parties are huge, and it's all about getting all the neighbors together. But even that, I feel, with modern technology, is kind of falling by the wayside, in that people aren't gathering as much. When we moved to our community where we live now, what we did about 2 weeks into it is we invited all the people within like 4 houses in each direction to our house for breakfast. And a lot of them said it was the first time that they ever met, which I was really surprised by. But one of the things that it emphasizes the importance of helping facilitate, and our responsibility as Muslims to help facilitate those relationships, because it just strengthens a community if you feel like you're looking out for each other. And my neighbor next to us, they had a dog, and we didn't have a fence between us and everything else. But another thing to think about, I was reading something on the internet about how a woman is like a blog, or some kind of chat where she asked, I have 2 dogs, and I'm thinking about buying a house, and there's Muslim people live next door. And she says, I don't have a problem with Muslims, but I've heard that they don't like dogs. So does anybody know anything about this? Can anybody help me? But I thought this was really fascinating, that she was trying to educate herself and trying to find out, like, I don't want to start off on a bad foot with my new neighbors. How can I approach this topic? And it shows that concept that a lot of people have, I think, in this country, that I want to get along with my neighbors, and I want to feel comfortable with them. When it comes to Islam, there are multiple hadith, and we heard a couple verses from the Quran that talked about service in general and looking out for people. But there are multiple hadith that talk about being good to your neighbor. They run all the way. They run from sharing your food with your neighbor to committing a crime against your neighbor, like stealing from them, is like worse than committing 10 of those crimes. For example, the specific hadith says, if you steal from your neighbor, it's worse than stealing from 10 other people. So this concept that your neighbor and the relationship there is more sacred than even a relationship with anybody else if you were to harm that relationship. And the other thing is, there being a great punishment if your neighbor fears you or if your neighbor is hurt by you in any way. So I'm not going to go through all those. You guys can all Google that, but the concept is there and it's very strong. It's really fascinating to me when I started doing the research on that. It's like, wow, it's really strong within the hadith or the sayings of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So when it comes to the neighbor, I believe that what we're talking about is this concept of the other. And basic morality is, because even with the verse that the sister read, it's the neighbors near and far. And with the verse that the sister read, it implies that it's not just the person right next to you. Now in Islam, when we talk about the neighbor, we talk about service to others. So we're talking about the community in general. You learn that as we grow up. As a child, you have a right to be selfish. And our parents always teach us not to be selfish, right? Not always to share and to help people and these kind of things and have good manners and all these things that we consider moral qualities within our faith, but also within our American community. And so when it comes to us growing up as Muslims in the United States, we start seeing these concepts within our faith that extend to service within, starting from close to us to outward. But it starts with our parents as we're growing up, and then when we get married, I do, as the sister mentioned, a lot of marriage counseling, and one of the things that I constantly struggle with is helping people understand that marriage is not about seeing what you can get out of a relationship. If you approach marriage as one of service, as how can I serve my wife and my family, my husband and my family, and be willing to be humble. In the Christian community, there's a big movement of this as well, as there's a program called Humility in Marriage or something like that. And Rutgers University did a study several years ago. They continue to do them. It's State of Our Unions, they call it. I think it's every 3 years they do it, or every 4 years. And basically they study marriage in the United States. And they study what's affecting it, what are the trends. And one of the things that they found, this was about 7 years ago, is actually the author of the research article was saying that the single biggest threat to marriage in America today is what he called secular individualism. And what he meant by that is this movement away from faith as a core basis of the family and the marriage, and then also a movement towards individualism. What can I get out of things, right? What can I get out of this? What can I get out of marriage, every relationship in my life? And so what that does is it sets up a relationship for lots of expectations. When you enter a marriage, and everybody, a lot of young people here, but when you enter a marriage, what you're finding in marriage nowadays is people are entering into marriage, and this is not just in the Muslim community, this is across the country, okay? When you're entering into marriage, people have higher expectations than ever before, but less commitment overall to the concept of marriage or the institution of marriage. So very quickly I enter into marriage and I realize, wait, I'm not getting out of this what I thought I would, then I better get out. It's not what I thought. And I get couples that come to me sometimes who've been married for, well, actually less than a month sometimes, and they say they want to get a divorce. And I say, if you talk to anybody that's been married for longer than 5 years, they're gonna laugh at you. They're gonna say, because, you know, he's not doing this, that, or she's not doing that, that's not a reason to end a relationship. But that's because they're approaching it the wrong way. And if you're approaching it as a way of saying, what can I get out of it, rather than how can I serve and become the best husband I can be or the best wife I can be, then you get much more out of the relationship. And then that gets really complicated, but that's why marriage is difficult. But you know, when it comes to service, I think we need to remember that. The other big thing is when I don't know if any of you saw, you know, was it TEDx Talks or TED Talks, whatever they're called. There's the one where they talk about how the more money a person makes, the more they feel they deserve it, and the less they feel other people have deserve any of the money, any of their money. So basically, charity, the desire for charity, or the desire to give, starts to fall off the wealthier a person gets, generally speaking. So what they talk about is, you know, what we talk about in Islam is this concept of that, you know, it's okay to become wealthy, but one of the ways our scholars would put it is that as long as, you know, don't let the world enter your heart, if you keep it in your hand, then you'll be happy. And this meaning that once something becomes part of who you are, once I am this wealthy businessman, now if I start to lose it, or if someone asks me to give some of it away, I feel like it's taking away a part of me. But if it's just something that's in my hand and I know that I could lose it at any moment, then I use it in this world to make the world a better place, and I use it to benefit me as well. But it's not something that becomes me and takes over my being and how I relate to other people. And this is really powerful because this study kind of shows that, how people let it get into their heart. And you know, one of the things that a lot of people understand, and one of the biggest blessings in my life, was when I graduated from undergrad, I got to work in child welfare, and I did that for approximately a year and a half before I went to graduate school. And I say it as a blessing because I got to experience a perspective that probably I couldn't have any other way. And I was going into families to visit children who were in foster care, who were taken away from their parents, and their parents were trying to earn them back either through completing certain programs out there, whether it's drug rehab or parenting classes. And then when they complete those, they can go back to court and try to plead their case with their lawyer to get their children back. And so I was responsible for visiting these children on a regular basis to make sure they're doing okay and help the parents have access to services. And one of the things I realized very quickly is that we are not born into this world equally. We know that conceptually, but when you see it firsthand, when you see a child who's only 3, who was born drug exposed, who is now in foster care with a foster parent that's really just too busy for them and doesn't have this nurturing. And then when you have people who come from wealthy communities or never saw anything like that, or who never experienced anything like that, and they go into that community, and then they say, why can't these people just work? Why can't they just do this? You know, it's a perspective that comes from not knowing and understanding the situation. Because the reason why we have that perspective, why can't I just work? Why? Because we can. Because we experienced that growing up, most of us, right? And so I thought this was really interesting when I saw that little video clip, because I said, well, that's fascinating, because that's an example of how the wealthier we can get, we've got to be careful, because our desire to serve can sometimes fall off, or it's not as proportionate as it once was. Maybe we were making less money, or we were less successful. We gave a lot more of our time, a lot more of our money, and percent-wise, but then when it came to us becoming wealthy, we've got to remember that. So then when our parents become old, this is another example of our society. Sometimes we can act as if our parents are a burden because they're old now and they're kind of in our way for making money and do these other things. We have to take care of them. And in Islam, we have this concept of serving our parents because they served us when we were younger. And so they have that right over us. So we start talking about people's rights over us, the orphan, the old, the weak, and we have that concept within our faith to make sure that we remember that. So I want to share some examples for you within our faith because I think they're really important and they're beautiful stories from my perspective. Now, Umar ibn al-Khattab was the second caliph in Islam, and he was a companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And there's a beautiful story about when he was caliph. One of the things that, may Allah be pleased with him, he was known for trying to go out and be amongst the people as much as possible so that he can see kind of what the state was. And there was one situation where he heard a woman, he was walking in one of the mountains, he heard a woman crying, or children crying, and he looked and there's a fire, and she's stirring this pot on the fire. And the kids are crying and they're hungry. And she's just singing and she's trying to get them to calm down. And she never feeds them. And then he asks her eventually, like, why didn't you feed them? And she says, essentially, I don't have any food. And she says, but this leader of ours, Omar, he's not taking care of me, basically, she implies. And so the next day what he does is he goes down and he gathers all kinds of supplies for her, food. And when one of the servants that was with him asked him, here, let me carry that for you. His reply is the fascinating part of the story. He says, will you carry my burdens for me on the day of judgment, right? So I have a responsibility to this person who's holding me accountable because she doesn't have enough food to feed her children. And so this is an example of someone who wasn't considered a king. He was a leader in a community, but we know that within our faith, Islam holds the people with power more accountable to the people who don't have it. And that includes all the people that we mentioned so far, because you have more power to be able to affect change. The next story I want to share with you is the story of a wealthy merchant by the name of Abdurrahman ibn Auf. And Abdurrahman was a companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him, but he also was known for his ability to make money. And some of the companions used to joke and say, if he just flipped over a rock, there would be gold under it. And so one of the other stories was that when he made his pilgrimage to Medina, the Prophet, peace be upon him, paired him up. He would pair people up with other people from Medina. They called them Ansar. So he paired them up, and he paired Abdurrahman with another wealthy merchant from Medina. Now the wisdom in this is that, okay, the community needs to grow in wealth, and this man could gain wealth. So let me pair these two powerhouses together, and then we'd be able to maintain some wealth and help the community, because at that time they were very poor. And when he was offered this, Abdurrahman said, just show me the market. He said, I don't want your money, just show me the market, because this man was supposed to share part of his money with them. So the story goes that Abdurrahman, by the time the Prophet had passed away, peace be upon him, he had amassed a large amount of wealth, and that is Abdurrahman. And so much so that the people in Medina were sitting there, and all of a sudden they started hearing a rumbling. And Aisha, one of the wives of the Prophet, may Allah be pleased with her, said, what is that noise? And someone said, that's the caravan of Abdurrahman. And then in that moment, she remembered that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that Abdurrahman will enter heaven crawling. Okay? And so in the meantime, this word gets back to Abdurrahman, and he comes to Aisha and he says, I heard you mentioned the hadith that the Prophet stated that I'd go into heaven crawling. And I remember hearing that as well, but you just reminded me of it. He said, by God, I will give this whole caravan in charity if I could just go into heaven walking. right? And so this is an example of someone who's not attached, that their wealth isn't in their heart, it's in their hand. And so, and the story goes, he did. He gave it all in charity. But that also shows the high level of faith that the people had back then, and that how they wanted to be those who were seen as the best in the eyes of the Prophet and his companions, peace be upon him. So then we also have the story of Abdullah ibn Mubarak, who was a scholar in Islam. He was a contemporary of Imam Malik, and his neighbor was a Jewish man. And his neighbor said that he was selling his house, and so he couldn't sell it. And so Abdullah ibn Mubarak, Abdullah said, what's going on? Why are you selling your house? It's a beautiful house. And then the man told him how much he was asking for it. And Abdullah said, that's way too much. Why are you asking so much? He goes, well, I keep telling everybody because you're my neighbor, I could charge them extra, right? So when we have this concept now of different people between different faiths not getting along, this was, we got to look back into these gems in our history where we saw people that were doing great things. And Abdullah ibn Mubarak then, from what I hear, bought the house. From what the story goes, he bought the house from him. So this importance of treating our neighbors well is again emphasized on another level. And then I'm going to tell you a last story about another man who was actually my wife's grandfather, who lived in India in a community that was pretty much half Muslim and half Hindu. And for his whole life, he made a commitment not to ever cook beef in his house out of respect for his Hindu neighbor, right? I mean, we just got to think about this for a second. Abdullah ibn Mubarak also said something. We have a much greater need for a little bit of adab, which means like etiquette, than a great deal of knowledge. You can have a great deal of knowledge, but if you don't know how to act towards other human beings, then that knowledge isn't doing you any good. So the last thing I want to share with you about what was recited in the very beginning of the day, that's Surah Fatiha. And this is really significant. This was taught to me by one of my teachers, Muzaffar. He, one of the things he talks about when he talks about Surah Fatiha is he says, just notice the language in it. It implies community in and of itself. It doesn't say I. When I'm praying at home, I'm saying, Ihdana siratal mustaqim, right? Show us or guide us to the straight path, right? Now it's about humanity, and it's not about just guide me, just take care of me, right? We could do that later on. We make our prayers, supplications. But when it comes to all of Surah Fatiha, it's about, to you alone we worship, to you alone we seek help, right? So it's all these lines that talk about us and we and us as a community. And so when it comes to our approach to faith and how we approach our community here in the United States in general, just like the woman who searches on the internet, the Christian woman who says, I'm planning on moving next to a Muslim neighbor, what do I need to be aware of so that we can have a good relationship? To the examples that I gave you where you have the ruler who looks out for his neighbor, and he sees himself as a person of service, not someone who needs to be served. And that's the easy thing. It's easy for us to go and meet Barack Obama or the president, if you're not a Barack Obama fan, any president that you've been a fan of, if you've been a fan of, and shake their hand and feel like, oh wow, this is the president, okay? But it's another thing to shake the hand of a homeless man or someone else and feel like you're on equal footing with them, or that you can serve them in some way. And so, we have that example of the ruler, the wealthy person, the scholar, and then the everyday average Indian man in Hyderabad, India, who feels the need to respect his neighbor enough not to ever cook beef, to give up a whole part of what would normally be part of his appetite or his cuisine, and give that up. So, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Any questions about any things I mentioned today? questions. You know, one of the things that I always say about when it comes to the trend in the United States is that several years ago, the porches were built on the front of the house. And this is a big part of community, is that people would sit on the porches and they would talk, and then you would come across and talk from their porches. And then people eventually started building decks in the back of their houses with big fences, right? And you're starting to see a swing in the opposite direction again. People are starting to build some porches in the front of the house, and people are trying to do that. But I think within the different faiths, and we have this pluralistic society, we have to reach out even more, because people often fear what they don't know. And so, and that's okay, that's normal. But it's abnormal if you try to act like, oh, they should just accept everything. We accept who we are and how we do things and everything else. Because we have a responsibility to reach out. I say we, everybody in this room, have a responsibility to reach out to your neighbor, the person next to you, the person across the street. There's a woman across the street, I felt so bad. Her husband passed away in December of last year, and this winter with all the snow, I went across to help her shovel, and then she's like, oh yeah, it's been hard, my husband passed away last year, and I was like, oh my God, I had no idea, right? Because it was in the winter, and nobody's getting out much, and so something like that can happen, and you don't realize it. And so, again, I felt my responsibility as a neighbor I felt like I failed a little bit there, but tried to help her over this winter.
Question. You mentioned how you traveled overseas.
Mhm.
What were like the main differences and or similarities you saw between the Muslim community and like overseas, and like if you want to compare it over here?
In what regard? I mean,
Like interaction, like
Well-
over here I see it like we're sometimes more isolated, and
we can be. I think any cultural community can do that. You know, being Mexican, I know that a lot of Mexicans will move into a Mexican neighborhood. You know, even like in the western suburbs of Chicago, you see that. Like in my community where I live, there are very few Hispanics. And then you just move a little further west, in like West Chicago, St. Charles, there's a huge Hispanic community, right? And so a lot of immigrant communities tend to do that. So I don't think the Muslim community is alone in that. Also, we see Lithuanian communities moving in. There, a Lithuanian church will open up, and a lot of communities will move around them. So I think you have that. But that's also one of the great things about America, is that everyone else, I remember as a Muslim community with the Noe Foundation several years ago, we traveled to different places. We went to Spain, went to China, and people couldn't understand that we were American, because there were all these Arabs and Indians, Pakistanis, you know, they're like, you guys from America? Like they pictured American Muslims that all look white, right? It's really strange. People don't understand this great thing that we have here, right? That's kind of like if I say to a lot of the people that weren't Muslim in the audience, like, okay, now imagine Chinese Muslims. It's hard to picture a bunch of Chinese people dressed in hijab and turbans, right? Or Muslim hats. But that's exactly what they are. They're not like Arabs living in China. I know it was even hard for me. I'd come and drive into a town, 400,000 people, all Muslim, they were all 100% Chinese. And it just boggles your mind, right? So we have this really great diversity within our Muslim community here. And part of reaching out to our neighbors is really great, because raise your hand if you're Muslim and you're not Arab or Indian or Pakistani. Anybody? Okay. So the reason why I asked that is because that's probably the two largest groups here in the United States. So people just assume that most Muslims in the world are from India or from Saudi Arabia, because that's what they know. Those are the two countries that talked about most in the news, those kind of things. You know, you have Iraq and those things now, but still, you know, a lot of people don't understand how many Muslims are in the world and how widespread they are. How 17% of the Muslim population is Arab, only 17%, right? Lives in the Middle East. Okay, so that means there's 83% of people in the world, Muslims in the world, that live outside the Middle East, right? Indonesia is the hugest Muslim country. So, but people don't know that because we don't have that many Indonesian Muslims here, at least in this community in Chicago. And so we owe that to our neighbors. I remember when my family moved into our neighborhood, we were one of the first Mexican community, families moved in the neighborhood. And that wasn't always easy, but my dad was very helpful with people, and he taught me that. He says hi to neighbors all the time, and so, that's one thing my wife noticed right away. But in a lot of Muslim countries, this is even this idea of looking out for your neighbor and serving your neighbor. This isn't necessarily that strong in Muslim countries, because sometimes where you have places like Egypt and Syria where the government was so oppressive that they really affected how people trusted other people. And so you had people for their houses, they didn't really interact with their neighbors because they didn't trust each other, and had a lot to do with the government and societies they lived in. But that's one of the things I wanted to emphasize today, was that is one of the strongest parts of American society. One of the strongest characteristics of Americans is, and I include myself in that group, of being good to your neighbor, and the whole concept of bringing them food, and you see these movies, old movies, are bringing them pies and these kind of things, and this is real. This is a part of establishing community, have people look out for you. This is why when we were little, if you grew up here, we can ride our bike 5 miles to baseball practice, but now everybody's scared to do that, to let their kid ride out of their sight, because we don't know our neighbors and we don't feel like there's people looking out for our children. So we could work towards that, and we have that in most of the Judeo-Christian Muslim traditions.
So my question is kind of in regards to American society. As the socioeconomic situation becomes highly polarized and it keeps polarizing more and more, why does secular individualism predominate? Like, why are things tending towards secular individualism?
Well, this is primarily in regards to marriage and how people approach relationships, right? And so, that's what happens as well when the community gets polarized. There becomes this thing of like wanting to watch what you have because they might try to take it, or whoever that is. And so, but when they mention the secular individualism, they're talking about marriage. And so, if you grow up and you're thinking, what can I get out of school? What can I get out of this? What can I get out of that? And there should be some of that, right? But you also got to think about, what can I give, right? What can I give? And in Islam, we talk about, it's not just money, but your time as well, and giving to the community. One of the challenges that I see, I've been parts of different Muslim organizations, and I think we see this in the Christian community as well, because I talked to a few of my colleagues, and is that finding young people that are willing to, outside of college, young adults that are willing to serve in their 20s and 30s. It's tough. Well, I would say 35 and older is a little bit easier, but in their 20s, willing to serve in their community because they're too busy. And one of the things I always say is that life doesn't slow down. It doesn't slow down until you retire. So saying you're too busy, you've got to figure out how to fit it into your schedule. And so we have this obligation to serve. And so we've got to make time for it. We have time for whatever we make time for. So a lot of people watch a lot of TV, right? And you'll find the minute you start serving your community, you won't watch so much TV, and that's probably good for you. So really, that's really entering a marriage. You're talking about, moving away from maybe, they weren't necessarily promoting religion as much as they were saying the ideals that come with religion when it comes to serving and when it comes to committing to matrimony as a religious institution, as something that's sacred. So it makes you want to try harder at it and work at it and see it as work as opposed to something that should just fall in place. And so the individualism part is more about what can you get out of it. So once you realize that it's not about that I always say one of the most satisfying things in a relationship, in marriage, is when you can just be yourself and serve your spouse and see that they're doing the same for you. Because then that's where you feel like someone actually has your back. If you feel like they're looking out for you while you're looking out for them. If you're always looking out for yourself, then she doesn't need to look out for you, right? You got it, you got this, but then it leads to a very lonely situation. So even if you are married, lonely but living together. Any other questions? Okay.
Kind of going off to all the some of the ideas you gave, like giving pie, your dad saying hi all the time. Do you have any practical advice for? Would you recommend maybe going back to some old American values we have as like practical first steps to kind of maybe you've been living in the community for a long time and just want to
Yeah, practical first steps. I think it's just talking, actually. A lot of neighbors don't talk.
Mhm.
And I have some of those neighbors, well, I'll say hi, and then just, they carry on their way, right? But like, the lady, I was helping her shovel, and then I was also talking to her, and I was asking her how things were going. She had a garage sale. Actually, that's when I found out. She had a garage sale over the summer. She was selling all of her husband's tools. And I went over there, and I just started talking to her, and I said, oh no, as soon as I saw the tools out there, I knew what had happened, right? It's like, oh my God, so I go over there, and I started talking. And then just talking to them about, how they're doing, what they're doing. They used to have a big camper. I started asking her about that. So and then sharing about yourself and your families. It's really about getting to know people. And the pie and everything else, or the breakfast that we had a brunch. So we just had like sweet rolls and coffee cakes and coffee. And we said, stop in any time between 9 and 12. We'll just be here. And people came in, and we just sat around and talked about what people do for a living, what everybody, how many children you have, and how old they are. And so that's really what it is, right? And let them see how much more you have in common than different, right? We all want success, and we all want to be successful financially, and then also socially, with our families, that they do well and our children do well. We want our community to be safe, and this is one of the ways to do it. I could give examples when I was growing up. It's funny because I got named after, my name Edmund is named after this 85-year-old man that lived next door to us, because when my mom was pregnant with me, she fell down the stairs, and she was calling for help because she was hurt. And the no jokes about that explains a lot, Edmund, right? No, but so she was hurt, and she was calling for help, and this old man came next door, and he helped her, and he got an ambulance and everything else. And so that's an example. And she knew them. They were an older couple, and we visited them a couple. I remember vaguely when I was little visiting them a couple times even after we moved. But they became almost like mentors to my parents. They were young. My parents were 21, I think, when they got married. So just getting to know people, and then you'd be surprised how often you can help each other. My other next door neighbors, they're great. I mean, we borrow tools from each other all the time. I help them with things. They're kind of like our mentors, and they're wonderful. And actually, it's really crazy because we went to India back in 2001, I think it was. 2005 was when the monsoons were really bad, and Bombay flooded. There's all this flooding in India, and we came home. My neighbor's like, "Yeah, we prayed for you guys. We were worried. We was like, yeah, we're okay, thank you though." And then we found out later she just prayed for us. She had her whole church praying for us, right? Because when she said we prayed for you guys, I was like, "Oh, thank you." Just thinking she's at night praying. And she's like, "No." Then a couple of days later, she goes, "Yeah, I remember. I asked them. I said, I want to ask everybody to pray for my neighbors who are in India. There's a lot of flooding going on." So I mean, this is the kind of things that build. And then I can go on with stories about them, but yeah. So it's really just getting to know them and stopping when they're out. Hey, walking over and having a conversation. That's it. I mean, because one of the quick ways to send a message that you don't like somebody is not talking to them. In Arab culture, non-traditional Arab cultures, is one of the worst ways you could treat somebody is not talk to them. Just like treat them like an animal, right? And there's there's some significance to that, right? The cold shoulder, they call it, right? We want to communicate warmth, not coldness.
So sort of just piggybacking off of that, this is like a but how do you deal with a community that feels estranged, and like you were saying, you were in the neighborhood that there's not many Hispanics. In the community that I live in, there's not many Muslims, and it was known for like the prejudice and racial ideal that some of the community members have, and that really helped. I mean, that proved to be very detrimental for a lot of people in the community. So what's the first steps maybe for that? Like when you feel estranged, you don't even feel like you're part of that community.
Yeah.
Where even just going to the supermarket, like you just feel like.
We have a great example of our prophet, peace be upon him, in that. that when he would go to the mosque, most of you know this story, right? He had a female neighbor, a woman who would throw garbage at him and throw things at him, and scream at him and all kinds of stuff. And then one day she didn't. And he went and visited her and he said, I just want to make sure you're okay because you weren't out there today. And she was sick, actually. So this is an example, right? So people, most of what, I mean, when I became Muslim, I told my mother I was thinking about it, and she said, oh no, she started crying. She said, that means I'm never going to see you, you're not going to come on Easter or Christmas and everything else. And then she said, and I don't even know what you're going to be believing, and I said, well, let me tell you this. I go, if I ever do anything that you disagree with on a moral basis, that you think is wrong, if you ask me about it and I explain to you and you still disagree with it, I'll never do it again. That's how confident I am in what I'm doing. And then what happened eventually now, on Christmas, we still go over there, and Easter we go over there too. I said, this is like one of the best meals all year, I want to make sure I make it. And then my brothers, they all go to their in-laws, and I'm still chilling there. You know, I'm like, I end up spending more time there on Christmas than my brothers do because they have in-laws that they have to go visit afterwards. They come there for the morning and they all leave, and I'm just like, well, what's the next football game on? Right? So I think it's really reaching out. People don't know. My mom didn't know. People don't know anything about Islam in general. I mean, that's why I think a lot of people are here just trying to educate themselves just because they just want to know. And that's where we start to respect each other because it's like, okay, this isn't, some of these stories I hear out there aren't true. And because everybody has stories. There comes tons of stories out there. We call it in psychology the man who argument. Well, I know a guy who, right? So therefore, that's the rule, right? Well, that's not how life works, right? People, you know, we can't generalize it. But reaching out, I think it's your responsibility, Sean, not to say like, when are they going to accept us, right? Let's do that. Like one on Eid, say, hey, send it. What we did is we sent my daughter. We printed invitations. We sent her, and she dropped off. Say, hey, we're having a brunch, just like meet the neighbors thing. If you want to come by. So the least threatening person in your family, send them to the door, right? The nicest, cutest kid in your family. Any other questions? Okay. If you guys have any questions, you can come on up afterwards. I'll be here for a little bit. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Brother Edmund Arroyo, again. Can I get another round of applause, please? I'd also like to thank all of you again for coming. I hope you found the lecture to be beneficial and informative, and hopefully you can all translate his words into practice and become people of service and better neighbors, inshallah. Before we conclude, I'd like to remind everyone that we still have one more day, or I guess a day and a half, of exciting Islam Awareness Week events coming up. Tonight we have an entertainment night where we'll have different performances, comedic videos, a boy group singing group. So a lot of exciting things. It's going to be 8 p.m. in LSB 142. We hope we can see you there. Also tomorrow we conclude the week with Friday prayer, where people can get a chance to observe what exactly goes on during a Friday prayer and hear a sermon at 140 and 240 in Bremner Lounge. And then our final event of the week is our culmination dinner. We're inviting Dr. Rami Nashashibi to talk about how we can build unity in our community. It will be 7 p.m. in Damon NPR. There'll be plenty of food and great company, so hope to see you guys there. Thank you again for coming. Please help yourself to refreshments in the back.